بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. So again, apologies for being late. Inshallah we can go past the 30-minute mark. There's no problem. We have time. So for anyone who's new, the series is going through the 40 Hadith of Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah. It's 42 Hadith, but it's called an-Nawawi. And I started from, if I remember correctly, Hadith number 21. So I started from the middle, because it's a little bit more convenient. And I'm again referencing a book called Jami' al-Ulumi wal-Hikam, Jami' al-Ulumi wal-Hikam, which is Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali's sharh, his explanation of not just the 40 Hadith of Imam Nawawi, he also added 8 on top of that, so it's a total of 50 Hadith. He goes through, he's a faqih, explained them, derived ahkam, took lessons, and all that kind of stuff. So I just read the chapter every week and then summarize it into, or not summarize all of it because it's very long, but just take key lessons, put it into as fast as I can, 20-minute lecture, inshallah. So today we'll go over hadith number 30, inshallah. عن أبي ثعلبة الخشني جرثوم بن ناشر رضي الله عنه عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إن الله تعالى فرض فرائض فلا تضيعوها وحد حدودا فلا تعتدوها وحرم أشياء فلا تنتهكوها وسكت عن أشياء رحمة لكم غير نسيان فلا تبحثوا عنها. It's Hadith Hasan رواه الدارقطني في سننه. On the authority of Abu Tha'laba al-Khushani Jurthum رضي الله عنه, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has laid down religious obligations, farad. So do not neglect them. And He has set limits, so do not overstep them. And He has forbidden some things, so do not violate them. And He has remained silent about some things out of compassion or rahmah, forgiveness, mercy for you. So in not forgetfulness, so do not seek after them. And the first key important point before getting into explaining the hadith itself, and explaining the way it categorizes these different actions, right? We have to first understand, how do we derive ahkam in Islam in the first place? What sources do we take from? How do we take from those sources, etc.? So again, I can't go through the whole thing in 20 minutes, but I'll give you guys just enough so we can understand the perspective of this hadith. So number one, ahkam in Islam, or rules, are derived from two main sources, the Quran and the Sunnah, right? And again, this is the Sunnah is the actions, the sayings, what Rasulullah saw and was acceptable, he considered acceptable, etc. And the Quran, of course, is the Quran that we have. Now, there's also two more sources which are extended applications of the Sunnah, and this is ijma' and qiyas. Now, also on top of that, Ibn Rajab also goes through and it talks about mafhum al-muwafaqa and mafhum al-mukhalafa, which I'm not going to get into today, but essentially it's, for example, let's say you have a hadith that says X is haram, don't do X, or actually let's say X is halal, and very strongly says X is halal. In certain situations, when there's certain linguistic requirements, you can take that hadith and also extract that the opposite is haram. So although the address of the hadith or the ayah is saying this is 100% recommended or halal, etc., you can take the opposite and say the opposite, mukhalafa, is that the opposite is haram, you can derive it. And this is something that fuqaha talked about, right? So that's a very quick explanation of the sources we take from in Islam. In everything we follow in Islam has to be from these sources. And again, notice one key point that I want to focus on. Notice how one of the four sources is not a scholar's opinion. One of the four sources isn't the guy who's standing up here, his opinion. One of the four sources isn't Ibn Rajab's opinion, even though he wrote the book, right? It's not his opinion. It's what you derive, a faqih, someone who's a scholar, what he derived from Quran and Sunnah. Which is why, again, you probably heard multiple times that, when you follow something in Islam, you want to, again, go back and follow the evidence, ask for dalil. Why? Because you want to make sure you are following Quran and Sunnah, not following what a scholar feels like or what he thinks. So this is a very important distinction. So now, to get into the actual meta and the text of the hadith has divided ahkam, rules, into 4 different types. Number 1, fara'id, obligations. And these are, again, just legal rulings where you're required to undertake a certain action. And if you do, you are rewarded. And if you don't, you are punished. So if you follow this, if you do this, then you are rewarded for doing it, and it's obligatory upon you. And if you don't do it, you're punished. So an obvious example is salah, right? If you leave your salah, then you're punished for it, right? But if you do your salah, you're also getting ajr even though you're required to do salah. So imagine, look at the mercy of Islam, that even when you're praying, even when you're doing something you're forced to do, it's not even that. And of course, as Muslims, you're supposed to be going and you're rushing to salah. You want to pray, and you should look forward to that time. But even the one who is praying because out of khashya, out of genuine, like, I have to pray because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded me to pray, even this person is getting reward for it. So look at the mercy of Islam. When you choose certain, and this is one of the hadith we went over before 2 weeks ago, when you choose certain foods to eat, when you take certain things that are halal and you eat that halal and you avoid the haram, or you do something, you sit in the company of people who are speaking about deen or etc., people who avoid haram, you yourself are avoiding haram and picking the halal option. And you picking the halal option is hasanat for you. It's good deeds for you. So again, fara'id is the first one, obligations, where if you do them, you're rewarded. If you don't do them, you're punished. Now the second is haram, which we're all familiar with. Again, it's the opposite. It's the legal ruling which, if you do it, you receive punishment. And also, if you abstain from it, you're rewarded. So notice it's the same opposite kind of thing. Like for example, pork is haram. If you eat pork, that's a sin. But you avoiding pork, again, like I said before, choosing the halal option, that's also a reward for you. Now, here's something that, now we get into the hudud, which is, we'll get into it, but this is a part that we have to understand a little bit clearly. And to explain it, I brought a hadith, but to explain what it is in English first. Hudud just means barrier, or a had is like a limit, right? Now, hudud is commonly referred to in Sharia as, the 7 things, or the 7 punishments that are given, is the criminal code, to people who perpetrate certain actions, right? But in this case, the hadith is talking about just boundaries. It's talking about boundaries that Islam lays out for you. So you can imagine, there's like a box, the parameters of that box, the lines of that box, the square itself, those are hudud. Those are boundaries that you can't cross. And this is contained of all the permissible, recommended, obligatory, and prohibited rulings. And of course, also the prescribed penalties as part of hudud, right? Now, we see this in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ وَمَنْ يَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ ظَلَمَ نَفْسَهُ. Right? And in one more ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَعْتَدُوهَا وَمَنْ يَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَ اللَّهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. So to translate, and that is the boundaries, the limits set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَنْ يَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَ اللَّهِ. And whoever transgresses past these boundaries, فَقَدْ ظَلَمَ نَفْسَهُ. Then he has oppressed himself. So you might think, automatically, what do you mean oppressed myself? If you're out there, let's say, for example, you do something that you find is fun, and of course it's against Islam, and you're doing it, and you see like, oh, I'm actually more liberated, or more free, or I'm having more fun, or you feel better, right? But really, you're oppressing yourself. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, again, notice the wording. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not say that you've oppressed him. He's saying you oppressed yourself. You being in the ma'asiyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is oppressing yourself, because you are taking yourself closer to Jahannam and farther away from Jannah. And again, the second ayah, that is the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is the boundaries or limits set by Allah. فَلَا تَعْتَدُوهَا. So do not overstep them, do not go past these limits. وَمَنْ يَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَ اللَّهِ. And whoever has gone past these limits, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. And they are the oppressors. And now to get a little bit deeper into understanding the meaning or the parameters of these hudud, an-Nawawi ibn Sam'an narrated that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Allah strikes an analogy. And this is a little bit longer hadith, so I'll go through, I'll try to paint the picture as best as I can, inshallah. Allah strikes an analogy, so he's giving us an analogy. A straight path, so imagine a straight path, on its 2 sides are 2 walls in which there are open doors, and over the doors are loose curtains. So again, you have a straight path, and on each side there's walls, and each wall has 1, 2, 3 number of doors, and each door has a curtain over it. Right? So paint the picture in your head. And over the door of the path, there is a crier saying, people, enter the path, all of you, and do not deviate. So at the end of this path, again, there's doors on the side with curtains. At the end of this path, there's another door where a crier is saying, don't deviate from this path and stay on this path and don't open any of these doors. Whenever anyone intends to open any of those doors, the crier says, woe to you, do not open it, for if you open it, you will enter it. Right? So the crier at the end of that path is telling you, don't open that door. And whenever you intend, whenever you look and your hawa, your desires push you towards, I want to open that door, the crier says, don't open that door, because it is bad for you. And it's taking you where? To Jahannam, right? So avoid that door as much as you can. And come to this door at the end of the pathway. And again, now to complete the analogy, Rasulullah ﷺ says, the path is Islam. So this path that we're walking on is Islam itself. The two walls that are set to the right and left are the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are the hudud that we talked about before. And the open doors are what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden. And the crier at the beginning of the path is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the crier above the path is the admonisher, or a fellow Muslim who's warning you, who's telling you, advising you, don't do this, don't do that. It's an admonisher of Allah in the heart of every Muslim. And I know it, like, let's break down and look at how deep subhanAllah's advice is, or this analogy is. At the end of the path, the one who is calling you to stay straight on this path of Islam and to avoid the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Quran itself. And not just the Quran, but your fellow Muslims who are advising you and telling you, don't do this, it's haram. Don't eat pork, it's haram. Don't free mix, it's haram. Don't do this, it's haram. Avoid it as much as you can. Why? Because they want to see you in Jannah. Because they want to go to Jannah with you. At the end, that's the goal. You want to, if you really care for your friends and they care for you, you want to go to Jannah together. That's where I want to see you. The goal isn't for us to become rich or to become have a certain status in society or get a certain position and be respected by the people. The goal is to get to Jannah. And because I want to see you in Jannah, I want you to avoid the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one last thing, and then we'll move on to the last section of the hadith. Notice how at the end, the crier, the one who is calling out to you to avoid this hudud, is the Quran. And this is a very important point to get into, especially considering the month that we're entering soon, Ramadan, inshallah, right? Quran is something that is supposed to not just leave our tongues, but affect our hearts. And it's something that's supposed to affect our actions by extension. So one thing that we have to be very aware of is sometimes some of us we'll recite the Quran and we'll finish the Quran maybe once, even twice, maybe multiple times in the month, or you'll do more dhikr, or you'll do more salah, and you'll do more adhkar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and more ibadah, yet somehow we walk out of the month and we go back to doing the same things we used to do. And this is a point that we have to understand very clearly. Of course, Salah is supposed to push away fahsha and evil deeds. That's what it's supposed to do, right? But again, is it the action itself, just raising your hands, and is it doing this that is pushing away the fahsha and the munkar? Or is it the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is it really that you are sincerely sitting there and you're not just reading the words, you're thinking about the words, and you're trying to apply those words, and you're trying your best to become a better and better Muslim day by day. And any mistakes you do, because you will do mistakes. We all do mistakes, right? Every bani Adam is a khatta, is a hadith, right? وَخَيْرُ الْخَطَّائِينَ التَّوَّابِينَ. The best of the khatta'in, the best of the one who makes mistakes is the tawabin, the one who does tawbah, right? So all of us are wrongdoers, all of us are sinners, but the wrongdoer who turns back in tawbah, this is the best of us, right? So it has to affect our actions. The Quran is not crying at the end of this path just for us to hear it and say, okay, yeah, I'll go back and read the Quran. And as I read the Quran, okay, I'm done reading the Quran, now I'll go back to doing what I used to do. It has to really affect our actions. It has to. And this is very important coming into Ramadan, that we have to not just increase our adhkar and ibadah, but again, increase your taqwa. This is the goal of Ramadan and fasting, right? Is to increase your consciousness and your khashya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, to get into the last category that the hadith lays out is maskut, which is the issues that Sharia did not specifically address, that didn't say specifically for this issue there's this certain ruling. So again, no legal ruling is issued that either implying prohibition, permissibility, or obligation. There's no legal ruling for it. And the prohibition of investigating those matters particularly and exclusively applies to the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because again, if I go back and read the hadith one more time, it says وحرم أشياء فلا تنتهكوها وسكت عن أشياء رحمة لكم غير نسيان فلا تبحثوا عنها. So do not search for these matters. Do not inquire into these matters. And I want to again give a clear example so we understand exactly what this is supposed to mean and why I'm saying that the prohibition of investigating these matters is during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there was a story of a man, a Sahabi, who when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was giving a khutbah, he was addressing the people, he was telling them about how Hajj is fard, right? So Hajj is fard. And this man, imagine, he gets up and he asks, Ya Rasulullah, is it fard every year? Rasulullah ignores him. And he stands up a second time and he says, Ya Rasulullah, is Hajj fard every year? And again, for a second time, Rasulullah ignores him. And then the third time, the man stands up again and says, is Hajj fard every year? And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he responds and says, ذروني ما تركتكم فإنما هلك من كان قبلكم بكثرة سؤالهم واختلافهم على أنبيائهم فإذا نهيتكم عن شيء فاجتنبوه وإذا أمرتكم بأمر فأتوا منه ما استطعتم. So translate, ذروني ما تركتم. So stick to what I've left for you guys. For verily, what has halaka, and what has destroyed or caused grief or caused devastation for the people before you is kathrat su'alihim, is the mubalagha, like an extra amount of questioning of their prophets. واختلافهم عن أنبيائهم, and their differences with their prophets. So if I tell you to avoid something or I forbid something, then stay away from it. And if I وإذا أمرتكم بشيء, and if I command you to do something, فأتوا منه مستطعتم, then come to it, فأتوا منه, and come to it مستطعتم, in whatever way you can. So do it in whatever way you can, right? And in another hadith, right, narrated by Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, إن أعظم المسلمين في المسلمين جرما من سأل عن شيء لم يحرم فحرم من أجل مسألته. That verily the person who is the biggest oppressor on the Muslims, and he's caused the biggest crime on the Muslims, is the one who asks about something that has not been haram, and then because of him asking, it becomes haram now, right? So to go back to the story, Rasulullah ﷺ is saying, I wouldn't, and to finish the hadith off, I'm not going to make Hajj fard on you every single year, because if I were to do that, you guys wouldn't be able to do that. So out of mercy, Rasulullah ﷺ is not answering the question. Why? Because if he makes it fard every year, then he knows not everyone in the ummah will be able to keep up with that fard, right? And these warnings about not asking questions and if something isn't explicitly said, then go and do what is commanded and fulfill that and stop right there. Don't continue to ask questions and delve into matters that you're not supposed to be inquiring into. But again, this is during the time of Rasulullah ﷺ, because wahi is still coming down. Wahi is still coming down, revelation is still coming down, and halal and haram, new rules are still coming down. But in our time, we have to be asking, we have to seek and question the ones who have knowledge, because you can't really follow halal and haram. You can't actually live your life by halal and haram if you don't know halal and haram, right? And you can't say, oh, well, what I know is halal, I'm gonna follow that. The rest of it, I'm not gonna ask any questions because the hadith it says that. No, right? You have to go and put an effort to find out what is halal and haram. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, إنما شفاء العي السؤال. Verily, the shifa, the cure for ignorance is questioning, right? So if we don't know about something, you have to go and ask. You have to go and ask. But now, and this is the last point, that we can't just ask about anything and ask about anything and everything and dive into matters that don't actually benefit us, right? We have to ask about matters and seek knowledge that is nafi', that is beneficial knowledge, right? We want beneficial knowledge, not knowledge that we're not going to use, or hypotheticals, or dive into philosophical matters that technically is this and that. If it's not going to affect your actions, if it's not going to affect whether you will go to Jannah or Jahannam, it doesn't matter to you, right? And this is the definition of beneficial knowledge. And to read a hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, لا يزال الناس يتساءلون حتى يقال هذا خلق الله الخلق فمن خلق الله فمن وجد من ذلك شيئا فليقل آمنت بالله. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is telling us that people will continue to ask questions. And again, in a way of mubalagh, too much, asking way too many questions. حتى يقال هذا, until the following is said. خلق الله الخلق. The Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has created the creation. فمن خلق الله. So who created Allah? فمن وجد من ذلك شيئا. So whoever sees this or it comes across this, فليقل آمنت بالله. Then he should say, I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, you have to take this hadith with in a very clear, understand it very clear. I don't want to leave it just like that. When someone comes with the question of who created the Creator, right? With certain people, if they're coming, and again, there's a context behind the hadith, if they're coming sincerely, it is a genuine shubha, it is a genuine doubt that they don't understand, and it is affecting their iman, you answer, right? And you dive and you explain, look, there's a Creator. The definition of a Creator in the first place means that He was the first one to create everything else. So to say that it's a Creator who created the Creator is a violation of definition in itself. And you explain that whole topic, right? But the context here is someone who is trying to spread shubuhat. So what's the difference? Someone who has a genuine shubha versus someone who is trying to spread shubuhat. Someone who's trying to spread doubts in the people by asking these tricky questions that, someone for example who's a layman or someone who hasn't studied, who will come across and be like, oh, I don't know the answer to that. I didn't think about that, right? And the person himself doesn't have an answer to the question. So he's just asking the question why. He wants to push a certain narrative. He wants to create shubuhat, right? So again, the kind of knowledge that we're looking for is knowledge that is beneficial, knowledge that will genuinely affect my akhirah. If it will affect your akhirah, then ask and get the answer and be satisfied with the answer. Keep on asking until you are satisfied and you understand the topic completely. Because it's a matter of iman. Iman is very important. You have to have tasdiq jazm. You have to have complete 100% certainty in your iman. You can't say, I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 50% or 90% or 99%. It has to be 100%. I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 100%. I know with yaqeen, with certainty, that I will return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to read one last quick example, we'll end off right there and we'll have Q&A inshallah. وروى أيضا بإسناد عن عبد الله بن عمرو بن ميمون بن الرماح قال دخلت على مالك بن أنس فقلت يا أبا عبد الله ما في الصلاة من فريضة وما فيها من سنة أو قال نافلة فقال مالك كلام الزنادقة أخرجوه. So one of the tabi'een, he went to Malik ibn Anas رضي الله عنه, one of the Sahaba, and one of the very close Sahaba too. He's very knowledgeable. He says, Ya Aba Abdullah, O father of Abdullah, ما في الصلاة من فريضة وما فيها من سنة أو قال نافلة. He's asking a question. Is the salah, is it fard, or the action of salah fard? Notice the question. Is what is in salah fard, or is it sunnah, or is it nafila? Is it an obligation? Is it just a recommended? Or is it, it's just voluntary, supererogatory? فقال مالك كلام الزنادقة. He says this is the speech of heretics, right? And he says أخرجوا, so get him out of here, right? And this is actually, to give more context, it was a discussion some people were having in terms of, and some of the scholars were having in terms of, of course salah is fard, but what about the specific actions within the salah? What category does that fall under? Right? And they would have discussions about this, and this is in the book. Ibn Rajab explains the different opinions, right? But look at the response of Malik bin Anas, the Sahabi. He says, more or less, get out of here. And I don't want to hear that, right? Because again, it has nothing to do with his akhirah. Okay, this specific action in the salah of doing this is technically actually voluntary and it's not recommended. You have to pray salah and you have to perfect it. You have to do it as best as you can, as accurately as you can, to the way Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to pray. So you approach the deen with that perspective, that I'm looking to solve a genuine problem. I'm looking to change something about myself, and I'll go to the deen to find the knowledge and apply it. To find the knowledge and apply it. So again, that is the goal of learning Islam. It's not to walk around and impress the people that I can explain some deep philosophical matter, but really in reality it has nothing to do with anything practical. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وجزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.